Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. It's a quote that I think of often. My first 20 episodes of my podcast, I started with this quote. Thought it was really profound. A lot of what Rodrigo spoke about. You can take the quote, obviously, a couple of different ways. Obviously, there's context to consider. However, let's just take it at pure face value. Who wouldn't agree with this sentiment? Misplaced trust in anything could be a recipe for disaster, and I think we can all agree on that. So who said unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth? Albert Einstein. Which I find extremely ironic, as we'll touch on a bit later. So my presentation here this morning is going to, the plan is I'm going to skim the surface of 7 topics that are, I feel, persistent in the overall conversation when it comes to this discussion of the shape of the world, and used often by defenders of a globular earth, often as appeals to authority, unthinking respect for the perceived authority, that is. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive analysis on each topic whatsoever, but simply to give you a taste of what many on the globular earth side of the conversation attempt to use as so-called proofs of a globular earth, and why I think those arguments don't hold water. We're running out of space up here. So this presentation, again, not intended to be evidence for and certainly not proof of the flat earth, but more of a high-level analysis of alleged globe earth proofs. What I've found they are actually based on, and why I think they are pointless for anyone to try and defend a globular earth theory. Hence why I call them gobbledygook. I'm not sure if it's a term that is used on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, but I use it often in the States when I refer to gibberish. And I think the origin is referring to the sound a turkey makes. So before we dive into these 7 topics, I kind of felt compelled in any situation like this to make a few requests based on my experience in seeing how the media handles these sort of gatherings or these sort of events. So if you're seated in this auditorium and you're a journalist and you're covering this event, I'm not sure there are any in here or not, but first off, we would appreciate if you would not make any reference to or even mention the Flat Earth Society. Personally, I'm not associated with this group, and I do not believe anyone here is either. When we see articles covering events such as this, the Flat Earth Society is often mentioned, and it just reveals how lazy the journalism was, as Rodrigo mentioned. Somebody simply Googled Flat Earth and looked at the few links at the top of their search engine results, and this is what they come up with. So we believe the Flat Earth Society is controlled opposition. If you don't know what that means, look that up. I think they mix a little bit of truth in with a portion of outlandish claims, so that at first glance, you're compelled to dismiss the entire idea quickly, all the while thinking you've actually done some research. Trust me, you haven't. We know that if you spend time actually researching this topic, you'll be sucked in. So the idea is that you Google Flat Earth, end up on the Flat Earth Society page, and see something that you will laugh and move on quickly. Secondly, there's no one here that believes that we live on a pancake or a pizza floating in space, so please do not include these sort of images in your article because it's disingenuous and does not represent our findings or beliefs in the least. Next, no one here believes the Earth is moving upward at 9.8 meters per second squared, which causes us to experience something akin to gravity. We do not believe the Earth is moving in any way, shape, or form, period, paragraph. And finally, please stop asking, where's the edge? We believe the world's oceans are surrounded by Antarctica, which is like the shoreline of a lake. So when I get that question, I usually respond, can you fall off a lake? So please do not, of course you can, so please stop asking if you can fall off the Earth. And do yourself and all of us a favor and research the Antarctic Treaty. You'll begin to understand why we all aren't piling in a boat this weekend and heading to Antarctica to see what lies beyond. We are unable to travel independently below the 60th parallel and must not only have our own government's permission, but all of the permission of the governments that have land claims in Antarctica. There are no motorized vehicles allowed, no sled dogs, and you have to bag your own urine and feces. The The Antarctica Treaty alone should cause you to question the motives of the world's governments if you dare to look into it. And one final point, while I'm on the subject of Antarctica, no, we are not planning a cruise there next year. If you Google Flat Earth Cruise, you still come up with hundreds of headlines making that claim, and that was never the plan. One media outlet got it flat out wrong, and hundreds of other media outlets simply copied that story and didn't practice any due diligence and just ran with it. All that being said, if you are a journalist attending this convention, first of all, thank you for being here. We hope you represent the organizers, the speakers, and attendees respectfully, and most importantly, we hope you represent them accurately. My rant is over. All right, let's get going. As I mentioned previously, going to touch on 7 topics that are persistent in the flat Earth versus globe Earth conversation used by defenders of the globular Earth with unthinking respect for authority. And here they are. Number 1, the Earth is a pear. Number 2, radius, or R, of the Earth. Distance to the Sun, the shrinking Sun, Coriolis effect, gravity, and gas pressure. All right, number 1. When it comes to the shape of our world, the idea that the Earth is not being a perfect sphere comes up often. Officially, we are told the Earth is an oblate spheroid, meaning it is a bit wider than it is taller, somewhere between 13 and 20 miles wider than it is taller, in fact. Therefore, difficult to tell by distant observation of the Earth's oblateness. Satellites, we're told, have to be about 22,000 miles away in order to see the entire disk at one time. Then we're faced with claims such as this meme, which suggests that if you take the highest resolution pictures that we get of the Earth, 121 megapixel files, 40 megabytes, from the Japanese weather satellite, the Himawari, and measure down to the individual pixel count and compare the width and height of the Earth, then it measures wider than it is taller, supporting the notion that the Earth is not a perfect sphere, but an oblate spheroid. There are 121 million pixels in these images. So I want to give thanks to moon researcher Dave Marsh, maybe you're familiar with him. He uses the same technique with special commercial software to measure the angular size of the moon using pixel width. And we verified that this meme is in fact correct in its measurements of the image of the Earth, and it seems to support the notion that the difference in the width and height of the disk is about 0.3%. which aligns with the WGS-84 model of the Earth, so somewhere around 13 to 20 miles wider than it is taller. So point for the globe, right? Well, not so fast. The problem is that the absolute widest point of the highest resolution images that we get are precisely the same number of pixels from the top of the image that it is to the bottom, meaning the absolute widest point of the Earth in these 120 million pixels is exactly midway between the north and south poles, directly on the equator. Let me restate that differently just to make sure you're getting this. The same measurements used to prove the Earth's oblateness confirm that the Earth's absolute widest point is straight through the center of the circle, or the equator. Do you guys see a problem with this? Let me play a short clip. Hopefully this will jog your memory. There's it. Oh, don't have the audio. Yeah. Yeah, I'm at 100% volume. Well, luckily the words are on the screen. I've got a couple other videos, so it's going to be important that we get the audio going for this. So this is Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about how the Earth is actually wider below the equator than it is above. That's what he states. That's where he comes up with his pear-shapedness. That's what he calls it, okay? So it's slightly wider below the equator than it is above the equator, which is where his pear-shapedness comes from. So those high-resolution images of the Earth, which we are told are photographs of our world from 22,000 miles away, can be used to verify that the Earth is oblate, but they essentially debunk, then, the world's most famous and well-known astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, looked at as one of the foremost authorities on our universe by the general public, who says the Earth is wider below the equator than it is above. So let's talk about the world-renowned astrophysicist for a moment. To be fair, Neil is also known for his award-winning acting. Here's a list of his accomplishments from the Internet Movie Database. Did you know he's been nominated for Emmys and Grammys? And even was a Critics' Choice Television Award winner. We'll be picking on Neil quite a bit more this morning, so stay tuned for that. On a side note, regarding the Himawari images, they aren't really photographs anyway. As I've demonstrated previously in my Faking Space video series, in case you've not seen it, fakingspace.net, they are available free to stream or download directly from the website. What we found is that the weather patterns we see in the Himawari images are from combined local Doppler radar feeds and over land, and climate simulation weather patterns over the ocean. And software is used to wrap it around the Blue Marble Dataset 2.0 from NASA Illustrator Robert Simon back in 2002. So it states right on the FTP file server, the Himawari images, that the underlying land in the images is from the Blue Marble Dataset from 2002. Further, anyone can do a quick forensic analysis of any of the images that were given every 10 minutes from the Himawari and see that they contain no noise and no ambient light, which absolutely must be present if these are real photographs. And then finally, speaking of Dave Marsh again, I wanted to mention this, if you haven't had a chance to see what he presented in at the UK conference 2 weeks ago, which I thought was fascinating. He's calculating the angular size of the moon using the same software that he did for the Himawari for me. And he's done this nearly a dozen times now. And these are a handful of the photos that he's captured with his Nikon P1000, all consistently capturing the moon with a 2,000 millimeter focal length. And what Dave is observing is that over and over again, that the moon always measures smaller on the horizon than it does at its zenith. And as it heads away from the observer, it gets smaller and smaller. This is extremely strong evidence that the moon is smaller and closer than what we've been taught. So great work, Dave. So the world's most recognized astrophysicists, the Himawari, and the mainstream moon narrative all debunked in the same section. We're off to a good start. All right, we're going to move on to the radius or R of the Earth. The letter of the day, boys and girls, is the letter R. Maybe remember that from Sesame Street. Whether the Earth is a sphere or an oblate spheroid, it must have curvature. All Earth curve calculators used to indicate the hidden height of an object below the Earth's alleged curvature at given distances based on the observer's height, obviously, and the elevation of the object that's being observed. All require one essential piece of data in order to calculate the final result using geometry, and that is the radius of the Earth, or the R value. The R value is from the assumed center point of the globe, a location that no one has been to or can get to, it appears. The deepest hole ever dug into the Earth was approximately 8 miles, and that's about 3,950 miles short of where the alleged center of the Earth is. So the radius of the Earth has never been verified. Further, as we just established quite thoroughly, we're told the Earth isn't a perfect sphere anyway, it's oblate. This is a key point to understand, because if that were true, then the radius of the Earth would be unique for each observer and unique to the object that is being observed. There would not be one firm value of R for every observation. If the Earth is oblate, then there is no single value of R, therefore no set curvature, and otherwise an arbitrary or useless number. Now this becomes a big problem when you need an R value for things like Earth curve calculators. The most notorious, if you're not aware, most of you probably are, is the curve calculator created by Mick West on his metabunk.org website, which is favorited by proponents of a globular Earth. Last year, Mick West was taken to task by Nathan Oakley and Anthony Riley about this specific issue. Hope we've got the audio sorted here. The R value used in this, in his very popular Earth curve calculator, and the audio that was captured by the YouTube live stream was absolute priceless. So let's see if we can give it a listen. And looks like it's not working.